The village of Coldmere sat at the foot of the Glacier Spine, like a small stone dropped at the edge of a vast white world. Most people who lived there had never climbed higher than the first ridge. They had no reason to. The glacier was beautiful from a distance and dangerous up close, and that was enough of a reason to leave it alone. Elira Thorne had lived in Coldmere her entire life, and she knew better than most that the glacier did not care about people. It simply existed, enormous, patient, and silent. She had climbed its lower paths dozens of times to gather frostroot, a pale herb that grew in the cracks between ice and stone and was the only thing that eased her mentor's breathing during the long winter months. Marin, the old healer who had raised Elira after her parents passed, had taken ill in late autumn. The illness had settled deep into her chest, and by the first frost, it had become clear that ordinary herbs would not be enough. Elira had spent 3 days searching the lower paths and found nothing, which was why, on a gray morning, with snow drifting lightly from the sky, she laced her boots tight and climbed higher than she ever had before. She was not afraid of the cold. She was not afraid of the height. What she was afraid of was coming home empty-handed. She found the frostroot growing in a small alcove near the top of the third ridge, sheltered under an overhang of ice. She crouched down carefully, filling her leather satchel with steady, practiced hands. The snow around her was undisturbed. The air was so still that she could hear her own breath, and then she heard something else. The low, measured sound of boots on ice, and the quiet murmur of voices. Elira stood and pressed herself against the stone wall of the alcove. Through the thin curtain of falling snow, she saw a group of men moving along the ridge path. They wore dark coats trimmed with silver, and at the center of the group walked someone who carried himself differently from the others. Taller, quieter, the kind of stillness that people wear when they have learned not to show what they feel. She recognized the silver crest on his coat. Everyone in Coldmere knew that crest. It belonged to the Alpha King. She had not known he would be here. She had not known anyone would be here. She took one careful step back, and her boot found nothing, just the edge of a shallow, icy slope. She threw her hand out to catch herself, and pressed her bare palm flat against the snow. The moment her skin touched the ice, everything changed. The ground gave a low, deep shudder. Not violent, more like a long breath being let out after a very long time. The snow around her feet began to crack in thin, spreading lines, and from somewhere beneath the glacier came a sound that she could not quite name. It was not thunder. It was not wind. It was older than either of those things. The group of men stopped. Every one of them went rigid. The king raised one hand, and without a word, they all stepped back. From beneath the ice, something rose. It came slowly, the way something large and dignified always moves, not in a hurry, not uncertain. First the shape of it pressed up through the snow, and then the snow fell away on both sides. And there it stood, a wolf. Enormous, silver white, with fur that caught the gray light and seemed almost to glow from within. Its eyes were pale and clear, like light through old glass, and they held a kind of intelligence that made Elira's chest go tight. She did not run. She could not have explained why. Her legs simply did not move, and the wolf did not give her a reason to be afraid. It turned its great head toward her, and looked at her for a long moment. Then it dipped its head in something that looked, impossible as it seemed, like a bow. One of the king's guards shouted something. Elira barely heard him. "Don't move." The king's voice was calm but firm, and he was speaking to his guards, not to her. He stepped forward, separating himself from the group, and stopped a few feet away from the wolf. He studied it with the careful expression of someone trying very hard not to show that he had just witnessed something he had no category for. "Are you hurt?" he asked, and Elira realized he was talking to her now. "No," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "I just slipped. I was gathering herbs." He looked at the wolf, then back at her. "You touched the snow." "I caught myself." She paused. "I didn't know that would do that." She gestured vaguely at the wolf, which was still standing between them like it belonged there. The wolf turned its pale gaze to the king then, and something passed between them, not words, but the kind of understanding that bypasses language. Elira felt the edge of it, like warmth coming through a closed door. Images arrived in her mind, half-formed. A burning valley, 2 figures shaking hands over a spring of clear water, a wolf sitting down in the ice and closing its eyes. The heart spring, the king said quietly, as if the word had just surfaced from somewhere deep in his memory. The wolf sat down in the snow. His name was Ashbourne Vale, and he did not believe in legends. He had been coming to the Glacier Spine every year since he took the throne, because his father had done it before him, and his father's father before that, and because a king honors traditions even when he does not fully understand them. The annual ritual had always felt more like a ceremony of habit than genuine belief. Now 100-year-old wolf spirit was sitting in the snow in front of him, very much real, and looking at him like it expected something. "It needs us to find the heart spring," he said. He was not speaking to anyone in particular, but the girl, Elira, nodded as if she had reached the same conclusion. "I don't know where it is," she said honestly. "I don't even know what it is." "Neither do I, exactly. Only that it exists, and that something my ancestor did left it unfinished." He looked at her directly for the first time. She was younger than he had initially thought, with wind-burned cheeks and a satchel full of herbs hanging from one shoulder. She did not look at him the way people at court did, with calculation or flattery or careful anxiety. She just looked at him. It was unexpectedly disarming. "The wolf seems to want you involved." "I noticed," Elira said dryly. He almost smiled. "I'm going to need you to come with me. I have a sick mentor at home who needs these herbs. I'll have a healer from the palace sent to her today. She'll receive better care than these roots can provide." Elira was quiet for a moment. He could see her weighing it. Loyalty against curiosity, duty against something larger that she had not asked to be part of. "All right," she said at last, "but I'll want to check on her myself when this is done." Agreed. The wolf stood and began walking along the ridge, and they followed. 3 days into the journey, they were still arguing about something. It changed from day to day, the best route, the right time to rest, what the wolf's behavior meant at any given moment. But the arguing itself had become comfortable, almost easy. Elira had not expected that. She had expected the king to be remote, the way powerful people often were when they had spent too long surrounded by people who only agreed with them. And he was, at first. He gave instructions more than he spoke, and he kept a particular distance from her that felt deliberate. But on the second night, when a sudden mountain storm forced them all into a narrow cave, and Elira spent an hour helping a badly shivering young guard, while Ashbourne kept the fire steady and said absolutely nothing unhelpful, she started to see something else underneath the reserve. He was carrying a great deal, that much was obvious. It showed in the way he checked on each of his men before he rested, in the way he went quiet when he thought no one was watching him. He was not cold, he was careful. There was a difference. "You don't have to keep standing," she told him on the second evening, when he had been on his feet for hours. "The fire will stay." He glanced at her. "I'm not worried about the fire." "I know. You're worried about all of them." She nodded toward the sleeping guards. "They're fine. Sit down." He sat down. It seemed like it cost him something. "How long have you been doing that?" she asked. "Watching out for everyone while pretending you're not?" "Since I was 17, he said after a pause. "That's a long time." "It's the job." "It doesn't have to be a performance," she said simply, not unkindly. "You can just do it." He looked at her for a long moment. "You speak very directly." "You haven't given me a reason not to." He was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet, less guarded, more thoughtful. The wolf, curled near the cave entrance, opened one pale eye and then closed it again. Back in the palace, not everyone was happy about the journey. Lord Corvin had served 3 kings in his long career, and he had learned that the moments of greatest change were also the moments of greatest opportunity. A sleeping wolf waking up was not a legend coming true. It was a shift in power, and shifts in power needed to be managed carefully, preferably by someone who understood what was at stake. He spread the rumors quietly, the way he did most things. The girl was unknown. Her bloodline was questionable. She had appeared at exactly the right moment, touched the ice at exactly the right time, and now the king was traveling across a glacier with her, in the company of an ancient wolf. Anyone sensible could see the shape of a manipulation. He began studying the old ritual texts in the palace library. He was nothing if not thorough. The heart spring was smaller than Elira had imagined. It sat at the center of a natural hollow deep in the glacier, a pool of water so clear it looked like a hole cut out of the ice, revealing sky beneath. It did not bubble or steam. It simply existed, perfectly still, with a faint blue light that seemed to come from the water itself. Elira stood at its edge and thought about Maren. She thought about the old woman's hands, always warm, always moving, mixing remedies, holding foreheads, pressing herbs into palms with quiet certainty. She thought about how Maren had always been vague about her own history, had always deflected when Elira asked about her family. She understood now. She knew, Elira said. About the pact? Ashbourne asked. He was standing beside her. Somewhere along the way, the distance between them had quietly closed. About all of it. She kept me away from the court on purpose. She was protecting me. From people like Corvin, he said, and there was something tired in his voice that told her he had already received word from the palace. He had been dealing with it quietly, handling it, not wanting to distract her. What did he do? She asked. Nothing that can't be undone. He looked at the spring. Are you ready? She considered the question seriously, because it deserved to be considered. Then she nodded. What the pact required was not complicated, which was perhaps why it had survived a century of forgetting. It required honesty more than ceremony. Ashbourne spoke of protection, not the protection of strength or walls or armies, but the kind that comes from paying attention, from choosing, again and again, to show up. Elira spoke of care, not sentiment, but the practical, unglamorous work of tending to what needed tending, of noticing what others overlooked. The wolf stood between them and lowered its head until its chin nearly touched the surface of the spring. The water rippled once, just once, and then settled. The glacier did not shake. No great light filled the hollow. Nothing dramatic announced itself. But the faint tremors that had been unsettling the valley for days went still, and the unnatural warmth that had been softening the ice receded, and the air in the hollow felt, for the first time since Elira had come to the glacier, completely settled. The wolf raised its head and looked at them both. Then it turned and walked toward the mouth of the hollow, pausing at the entrance. It looked back once, clear-eyed, patient, entirely itself, and then moved out into the open ice, not disappearing, not retreating, just continuing, choosing to stay in the world on its own terms. Lord Corvin's scheme unraveled quickly once the king returned to the palace. The old ritual texts he had been studying were produced as evidence of his intent, and 3 separate servants confirmed they had heard him speaking of binding the wolf for his own purposes. He was stripped of his title at a brief, formal hearing, and he left the palace with less than he had come into it with, and significantly more humility. Maren recovered. The palace healer who had been sent to Coldmere wrote to Ashbourne on the 4th day that the old woman had turned a corner, and by the time Elira arrived to see her in person, Maren was sitting up in bed, looking annoyed at the fuss being made over her. You could have told me, Elira said, sitting beside her. I could have, Maren agreed. But you would have done something about it too soon. You needed to get there yourself. That's very wise, and very irritating. Maren smiled, which was answer enough. Months passed. The glacier spine stood quiet and whole. In the valley below, Coldmere went on the way small villages do. Unhurried, self-contained, largely unconcerned with what happened at court. But Elira was at court now, not because anyone had required it of her, and not because of anything as neat as a title. She was there because Ashbourne had asked her to stay, and because she had looked at the question from every angle, and decided, honestly, that she wanted to. She had become part of how he ruled, not in the ceremonial sense, but in the practical one. She asked the questions that went unasked. She noticed the people who were overlooked. She was, in short, exactly who she had always been, in a larger place. Ashbourne was different too, though he would not have said so himself. He rested when he needed to. He spoke more plainly. He had stopped performing the weight of leadership and simply carried it, which made it considerably lighter. On an evening in early spring, they walked to the glacier's lower ridge together, the kind of walk that needed no particular reason. The wolf was there already, stretched out on a flat shelf of ice below the first ridge, its silver coat bright in the last of the daylight. It looked entirely at ease, present, unhurried, neither asleep nor restless. Elira stopped and watched it for a moment. Do you think it's happy? She asked. Ashbourne considered this seriously. "I think it's free," he said, "which might be better." She thought about that. Below them, the valley was beginning to show the first thin green of spring. Above them, the glacier held steady, patient as ever. She thought he was probably right.